casual weekend retreat. My friend Jenna and I had planned to spend a couple of nights at her family's old cabin deep in the Maine woods. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape from our busy lives in the city, a chance to unwind and enjoy the beauty of nature. The cabin was rustic but charming, surrounded by dense forest and far from any other signs of civilization. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, the sun still high in the sky. The air was crisp, and the forest was alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. We spent the day exploring the area, hiking along trails that Jenna had known since childhood. As evening fell, we settled in, lighting a fire in the old stone hearth and cooking a simple dinner. The first night was uneventful. We chatted by the fire, reminiscing about old times, and eventually went to bed, lulled to sleep by the comforting crackle of the fire and the distant hoots of owls. It was the kind of night that made you feel safe and secure, cocooned in the tranquility of the wilderness. The next day was much the same, filled with laughter and exploration. As dusk approached, we decided to venture a bit further into the forest to gather more firewood. The woods grew darker and more mysterious as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to dance around us. As we were about to head back to the cabin, Jenna paused, her expression turning serious. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I stopped and listened. At first, there was nothing but the usual sounds of the forest. Then, faintly, I heard it too, a low, almost imperceptible growl. It was so out of place that I thought I might have imagined it. "Was that a bear or something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. But Jenna shook her head, her eyes wide with unease. "No, that didn't sound like any animal I know." We hurried back to the cabin, the unsettling growl lingering in our minds. As we bolted the door behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We tried to brush it off, telling ourselves it was just the forest playing tricks on us. But that night, things took a turn for the worse. It must have been around midnight when I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside. They were slow and deliberate, crunching through the underbrush. I lay still, listening intently. The footsteps circled the cabin, pausing every now and then, as if whoever, or whatever it was inspecting the place. I turned to Jenna, who was already awake, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do?" she mouthed. I shook my head, unsure. We both stayed silent, hoping that the intruder would go away. But then, the doorknob rattled. I felt a surge of panic, my heart racing as the door shook. Jenna grabbed my arm, her grip tight. The rattling stopped, but the footsteps continued, moving around the cabin. Then came the growl, low and guttural, echoing in the night. It was close, too close. We lay there, paralyzed with fear, as the growling grew louder. The footsteps stopped right outside the window, and through the thin curtains, I saw a shadow. It was tall, humanoid, but with something distinctly wrong about it. Its limbs were elongated, its posture unnatural. The creature pressed its face against the window, and I saw its eyes, glowing a sickly yellow. It snarled, revealing sharp teeth, and I stifled a scream. Jenna squeezed my arm harder, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I didn't move, barely dared to breathe, hoping against hope that it would go away. After what felt like an eternity, the creature stepped back, its eyes never leaving the window. It turned and walked away, the footsteps fading into the distance. We stayed awake the rest of the night, too terrified to sleep. when the first light of dawn crept through the windows, we cautiously emerged from the cabin. The area around the cabin was undisturbed, no signs of the creature. It was as if it had never been there, but the memory of those eyes was seared into my mind. We packed up quickly, abandoning our plans to stay another night. The drive back to the city was silent, both of us lost in our thoughts. We never spoke of it to anyone, knowing how unbelievable it would sound. But the fear lingered, a constant reminder that there are things in this world that we cannot explain. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see those glowing yellow eyes staring at me. And I wonder if it's still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler to cross its path. There's something deeply unsettling about waking up in the middle of the night to find your front door wide open. That's how my ordeal began, an event so mundane, yet so deeply wrong. I live alone in a small cabin in the woods, about 10 miles from the nearest town. It's a peaceful life, or at least it was until that night. I remember bolting upright in bed, a cold draft seeping through the hallway, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. The digital clock on my bedside table read 3:17 a.m. Heart pounding. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and crept towards the door. The lock wasn't broken, no signs of forced entry. It was as if someone or something had simply willed it open. For weeks, the nights grew increasingly disturbing. I'd hear footsteps crunching on the gravel path outside, see fleeting shadows flickering in the moonlight. Once, I found deep scratches on my front porch, gouges in the wood that resembled claw marks, though far too large for any animal native to the area. I installed security cameras, hoping to catch whatever was tormenting me. But each morning, I found the footage corrupted, static, glitches, and once, just for a split second, a pair of glowing eyes staring directly into the camera. One particularly cold night, I woke to a noise that turned my blood to ice. A low, mournful howl echoed through the forest, followed by what sounded like a person mimicking it, a grotesque parody of an animal's call. I couldn't sleep after that, too afraid to close my eyes. Desperate for answers, I reached out to an old friend, a professor of anthropology with a fascination for local folklore. He listened patiently as I recounted my experiences, his expression growing graver by the minute. When I finished, he leaned back and sighed. "What you're describing sounds like a skinwalker," he said. "They're creatures of Navajo legend, shapeshifters that can take on the form of any animal. They're known to mimic human voices, lure people out, and worse." I wanted to laugh, to tell him it was absurd, but I couldn't deny the chill creeping up my spine. He gave me some advice. Keep salt around the windows and doors. Never acknowledge the voices, and most importantly, never go outside at night. I followed his advice to the letter, and for a while, it seemed to work. The footsteps and shadows became less frequent, and the howling stopped. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The final encounter happened 3 nights ago. I was sitting in my living room, the flickering light of the TV casting long shadows. A thud came from the roof, then another. Something was up there, something heavy, pacing back and forth. My heart raced, and I grabbed the bat, my only source of comfort. Suddenly, the pacing stopped, and there was a scratching at the window. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. There, peering through the glass, was a face. My face. It was as if I were looking into a distorted mirror, every feature twisted and wrong, with eyes that glowed an unnatural yellow. It opened its mouth, and my voice came out, a perfect imitation. "Let me in," it said, the words a command, not a request. I stumbled back, shaking my head, unable to tear my eyes away. The creature pressed its hands against the glass, fingers elongating into sharp claws, scratching a terrible screech into the silence. In a blind panic, I grabbed the salt and threw it at the window. The thing recoiled, a guttural growl escaping its lips before it vanished into the night. I didn't sleep at all that night, clutching the bat and the salt until the first light of dawn. Since then, I've been living in constant fear, barricading myself in the cabin each night, every creak and rustle sending my heart racing. I don't know why it's targeting me, what it wants, or how long I can keep this up. The rational part of me is breaking down, unable to reconcile the impossible with reality. If anyone reads this, heed my warning. There are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows just beyond our understanding. And if you ever find your door open in the middle of the night, don't ignore it. Lock it, salt it, and pray that it doesn't come back. I've always considered myself a rational person. Science, facts, and logic have always been my guiding principles. So, you can imagine how hard it is for me to even write this down. But there are some things that defy all explanation. This is one of those things. It started last summer, a week into my solo camping trip in the remote forests of northern Arizona. I had taken time off from my job in the city to reconnect with nature, seeking solace in the seclusion of the wilderness. With just my tent, some basic supplies, and my camera, I set off deep into the forest, far from any established trails. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time hiking, taking photos of the stunning landscape, and enjoying the peace and quiet. The nights, however, were different. They were unnaturally still, with an oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. I brushed it off as a trick of my mind, a symptom of being so far removed from civilization. On the fifth night, as I lay in my tent, I heard it for the first time. A low, guttural growl, followed by the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. My heart pounded in my chest, and I grabbed my flashlight, shining it through the thin fabric of the tent. I saw nothing. After a few tense minutes, the sound stopped, and I managed to convince myself it was just a wild animal. The next morning, I found strange tracks around my campsite. They were too large to be from any animal I knew of, and had an odd, almost human shape. Unease gnawed at me, but I pressed on, determined to enjoy the rest of my trip. That night, the noises returned, closer this time. Heavy breathing, almost human, but wrong somehow. I lay still, clutching my flashlight, praying it would go away. On the seventh night, I couldn't take it anymore. The sounds had become more frequent and more disturbing. I decided to cut my trip short and head back to civilization. As I packed up my gear in the dim light of dawn, I felt eyes on me, watching from the shadows of the trees. I hurried, nearly running as I made my way back to my car. I thought I was safe once I reached the small motel on the outskirts of the forest, but the feeling of being watched persisted. That night, as I lay in the uncomfortable bed, I heard it again, the growling, the breathing, coming from just outside my window. I peeked through the curtains and froze. Standing there, illuminated by the moonlight, was a figure. It looked like a man, but its proportions were off, its limbs too long, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow. I closed my eyes, hoping it was a hallucination, but when I opened them again, it was gone. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I checked out and drove straight home, vowing never to return to those woods. Weeks passed, and I began to convince myself that it had all been a vivid nightmare. But then, the dream started. I saw that figure, standing at the edge of my vision, always watching, always waiting. I woke up in a cold sweat every night, the sounds of growling and heavy breathing echoing in my ears. I tried to research what I had seen, stumbling across legends of skinwalkers, shapeshifters from Native American folklore that could take on the form of any creature. I didn't want to believe it, but nothing else made sense. The rational part of my brain rejected it, but the fear, the primal terror I felt, told me otherwise. The final straw came one night when I was driving home from work. As I rounded a bend, I saw it standing in the middle of the road. I swerved, barely missing it, and crashed into a ditch. When I looked up, it was gone, but I knew it had been there. I couldn't deny it any longer. I moved across the country, hoping to escape whatever was haunting me. For a while, it seemed to work. The dream stopped, and I felt normal again. But then, 2 nights ago, I heard the growling outside my window. It's found me. Now, as I sit here, writing this, I know it's only a matter of time before it comes for me. I don't know what it wants, or why it's chosen me, but I can feel it closing in. If anyone finds this, know that there are things out there that defy explanation, things that science cannot yet understand. And if you ever hear a low growl in the dead of night, run.